All right, let's have a little look-see. This is Suzanne's chart. So I just want you to have a quick peek if you can see where Suzanne's Venus is, remembering what the Venus looks like. And I'll just give you a quick hint. Suzanne has a rather happy Venus. She has Venus in a place where she really enjoys being. She's not the ruler of, but she enjoys being. So here's her Venus, 18 degrees of Pisces. Remember, just use the cheat sheets as much as you need to come back to what does that gift stand for again, or what does that house mean again? Because Venus is actually in a house that she's the natural ruler of in this chart, in Suzanne's chart. So Venus likes the second house because the second house is naturally ruled by Taurus, which in this case is ruling the fourth house. Now, what happens is we start to see that Venus, who is the ruler of Taurus and the ruler of Libra, we would see her in all of these spaces. Even though she's actually in Pisces, we would still look here and here when we're dealing with this chart. Also, we would always kind of have a little bit of a feel into the two houses that she naturally rules, which would be the second house where she actually is situated, and also the seventh house where she appears to have nothing going on in this chart. However, that is a space that Venus naturally rules. But now we can say she has a very happy Venus. Now, if her Venus is happily well placed in the chart, as it is very much so in Suzanne's, because it's saying that she can really connect and remember, she also has Sun and North Node in Pisces. So Pisces is a strong sign for Suzanne. It's a strong archetype. She can tap into her natural creativity, her natural artistic tendencies, maybe dance, art, music, gentle, serene kind of energies. And it very much is in the space of her worth and her work, and in a happy way, in a happy, gentle, intuitive way. But also Venus is ruling her Saturn, who is in Venus's house, Venus's home of Taurus, and also Venus is ruling Libra, which is ruling her Uranus. So that's immediately going to say that Venus is kind of, in some ways you could say she's taking the edge off those planets, because they can both be a little edgy. In fact, I mean, Uranus can be a little bit like electrical, kind of shocky. And in Venus's space, just saying, it's okay, you know, you don't have to be constantly fizzing and zapping. Sometimes you can just get earthed and relax a little, even though it's an air sign. And for Saturn, saying, okay, well, I've placed you in, I'm looking after you in my Taurus space, which is grounded. So let's look at how to, in a stable, structured way, make those decisions, which is exactly what Saturn wants to do anyway. Stability and structure. Those are keywords for him and keywords for Taurus. So especially because Venus is happy, that's going to make that whole situation happier. If we look at Mindy's chart, we kind of mentioned this, I think, in one of our Zoom calls. Mindy has her Venus and her Mars right there together. So that's always going to be a storyline that she cannot get away from. In her case, they are in the third house. So it's kind of important in a community situation, friends, neighbors, extended family, sort of cousins, you know, that sort of thing, that there is this strong Mars-Venus dynamic. And we've talked about Mars and Venus being those counterparts of the masculine and the feminine. We can say that they are cosmic lovers. We can say that they are playmates. And in her case, because Leo rules children and fun, and they're both in the third house, I would very much say, like, there is a need for playfulness, for friends, for family and collective, and bringing in cousins and neighbors, and probably a full bustly happy environment is for Mindy is when there's a lot of different people around, buzzing in and out, and that's going to be quite a joyful place. And maybe if it gets too much because it's Leo, then there will be a roar of like, okay, I've had enough now, and bringing it to attention. Bearing in mind, she also has a lot of Virgo. So then maybe it gets out of control and chaotic, and then she needs to sort it out, okay? Because that Virgo is going to put everything in its nice, neat little boxes. We're just doing a quick touch in with these charts because we're going to talk more into them as you come in with your questions in the Talking Zoom, which I think we probably will be able to do on Friday because I have a space to go. So I think we'll get that right on Friday. Okay, sorry, whose chart are we looking at? This is Marty's chart. Can you spot her Venus? She has a Venus that is in retrograde, and she has a Venus that is not terribly happily placed. So that is a double underworld journey kind of process for Marty. So I'll point it out for you. Venus in Aries, 27 degrees Aries. And remember, Marty is an interesting thing because she has what's called mutual reception. She has Mars in Venus's house, in Venus's Taurus, and she has Venus in Mars's house, Mars's Aries. So in some ways they mitigate each other because it's like, well, if you let me stay, then I'll let you stay. And if you don't be mean to me, then I won't be mean to you. The kind of, on some levels, it negates the challenge just a little bit. But also she has that retrograde Venus. So a retrograde Venus very much links to the story that I just shared of Inanna Nereshkigal. And basically at the time of her birth, the Venus star point was happening in Aries, I would say. Yeah, no, it would have to be Aries. In Aries, so you are a Venus Aries and a Venus Aries and a Aries star point. So that's double Venus and Aries. And also, there is a natural tendency, if this is in your birth chart as it is here, there is this natural tendency to have to take these underground journeys, to go into the darkness and go, you know what, I need to unpack this. I need to take off those layers. I need to get a little bit more honest with myself. On the bright side, because this is Aries, and Aries is that warrior energy, that very Martian energy, there will be this kind of, sometimes I think of Aries energy as, that act first, think later, like just boldly dash into things head first and afterwards go, gosh, maybe I could have planned that out a little bit better, or maybe I should have paused for thought before I did it. And I mean, I have strong Aries in my own chart, and I actually find like sometimes it's more guts than sense. And then when I come to my senses, I often think, damn, I wish I'd, but then on re-reflecting, I often think, if I hadn't done it that way, I probably wouldn't have done it at all. So this is where you start to reflect on those things for yourself. Like maybe I was reactive, but actually my reactivity led to some kind of explosion that led to me unpacking something, that led to me doing this. And had I not started reactively, then maybe I never would have started at all. And I know that has often been the case for me, even though there is sometimes like that feeling afterwards of embarrassment or shame, like maybe I could have done it differently. So always reflecting in your own journey. And I do just want to point out, when you're born with, like in this case, a Venus retrograde, when we have Venus retrograde in the sky, you may find, for you, Marty, just like I think Hillary has the retrograde Mars, which we also just underwent last year, and that only happens every 2 years. So when you have that retrograde in real time, it may be an easier point for you than, say, it is for those more often of us who don't have that planet retrograde in our natal chart. And always, for all of you, remember that I said that we're going to be doing Venus retrograde in Leo. So go look where your Leo is. I mean, in Mindy's case, that's where her actual Venus and Mars are. So it's going to be pertinent, okay? If we pop in here, let's see, we're looking at Jen's chart. Can you see Jen's Venus? I'm just scanning myself. Oh, here we go. Okay, Venus here. It's so interesting because remember, it was pretty much just inside the second house for Suzanne, but Suzanne had it in Pisces and Jen has it in Virgo, which is opposite to Pisces. So they have their charts kind of opposite one another because it's in the same house. So she's happy in this house. Venus is happy in the second house. She's not so happy in Virgo. So Virgo means that Venus has to be a little bit more pedantic and ordered and organized and precise. And Venus prefers to, dance and sing and eat and cook. And yeah, she's not super interested in doing the dirty work almost. And Virgo kind of Virgo is all about like, let's clean it up, let's sort it out. So this can be a little bit uncomfortable. In the second house, though, and actually, Jen, in your case, I think if you look at what work you do, you have to be very organized and sorting and whatever. And I mean, you're even doing a bookkeeping course, aren't you? I think I may stand to be corrected, but have done or are doing. And that is very Venus in Virgo. So we might say, oh, Venus doesn't like being there. But in your case, it's actually literally helping you in terms of your own earned income and what you do for a living. So you can't really berate her. She's helping you with that. If we pop into, whose chart am I in? Hillary's chart. Oh, I should have just noticed this little stellium in Libra here. And actually we'll talk back into that again. Okay, here we go. Her Venus is up here at 2 degrees of Aquarius. But we also, and I'm just going to remind you of this because she does have strong Libra planets, Venus is also in charge of everything she has going on in Libra, which in her case is retrograde Mars, retrograde Saturn, retrograde Pluto. You might remember in one of our Zoom calls, I said I wouldn't worry too much about the retrograde Pluto Saturn. In some ways, the outer planets in retrograde are almost easier in our charts, but retrograde Mercury, Mars is a much more signature thing to have in your chart. About half of the year, these planets are retrograde, so it's common to have them retrograde in your chart. However, for Mars, it's not so common. So all of that energy is being lorded over by this Aquarian Venus, and also her Chiron wound, which is in the 12th house. So we would be looking at her 5th house situations and her 12th house situations, and actually even her 1st house, because it is cusping. It is the ruler. In her case, Taurus rules 2 houses. It rules the 12th and it rules the 1st. So that means Venus rules the 12th, the 1st, and the 5th. Okay? So an Aquarian Venus is airy and may be able to kind of like remove herself a little emotionally and have this visionary perspective. So it's not a sign that Venus is terribly happy or unhappy in. She's okay there. A little bit like, I think it was Candace who has Mars and Aquarius. Aquarius can emotionally lift out of a situation and look down on it with a big picture. Like sometimes I think of Aquarius as like an eagle flying above the situation, or like I often say, if Scorpio is looking into the microscope, Aquarius is looking out of the telescope. So Aquarius is out and up. So when you're in that Aquarian space, you're out and up. And if you want to look down on the situation, like what do I value? You can do it from this bird's eye view. And sometimes that's handy because it's always hard when you're right in the thick of something to kind of understand like, oh, this is just, I can't see the wood for the trees. But on the other side of that, sometimes it's too removed. So that's always something to watch with Aquarian energy, is where you may come across as too removed when and in your case, you've got 2 Aquarian things here. You've got Mercury and Venus. So yes, I don't want to spend too long on any of these charts. We will look at them again when we come back in our Zoom calls. Okay, who's this? Aries rising, Elaine. Okay, Elaine's Venus is, can you see it before me? Can you see it? Okay, Elaine's Venus is a strong one in the sense that it's got quite a lot of controversy, shall we say. It's right here in Aries, where it doesn't really like to be. Mars is home, and she's also got neutral reception. Look at that. She's got her Mars in Taurus, and this is exactly like Marty, but slightly in a turned chart, because Marty's has Taurus rising and Elaine's has Aries rising. So, but a very similar dynamic on some senses. And in fact, her Venus is at 5 degrees of Aries and her Mars is at 5 degrees of Taurus. This is an aspect that we're not really talking much to in this course, because it's going to get too complicated. When I talk about aspects, I'm talking about like just the few bigger, they're called Ptolemaic aspects, that opposition, square, trine, sextile, conjunction. That's it. We're not going to go too big into them, but this is also an aspect when a sign is one sign to the side of, so 30 degrees away from, and it's a little bit awkward. It's like that peripheral vision where you think you see it and then you turn and you can't see it, and it's kind of like always there. Can be challenging, okay? And this is like literally to the degree that these two are in this kind of, I can't see you. I know you're in my house, and I know I'm in your house, and I think you might be doing something in my house, and you think I might be doing something in your house, but we can't see, and it's irritating. It's like an itch you just can't scratch, okay? And add to that, she's got this conjunction of those two here, of the two malefics, and she's got a conjunction of Venus with Chiron. So this is very strong in the 12th house of self-undoing, actually. So self-undoing with Chiron and Venus means that Elaine has to work on herself continuously so as not to be herself undoing, which I think, Elaine, you could probably attest to, knowing that about yourself, that you have had to do some deep, like, Inanna journeys, because actually the 12th house is like the underworld in many ways. And so is the 8th house. So it's almost like you have to go into those dark spaces sometimes to heal another layer of the wound, remembering that Chiron, which we will get to in another month, but Chiron is a wound that never really fully heals. But as we learn to work with that wound, we are able to help heal others with that wound. But we need to keep checking in on the wound, and that is definitely part of your Venus story. This is me. Very glad I can just recognize my chart off the bat here. I have Venus in Gemini, same place as my sun, quite close to my MC, so that's quite a strong planet, not as close as Mars is to it. In the 10th house, which I sort of spoke a little bit to mine already, so I don't think I'm going to get into that. We can always unpack it a little bit more in our Zoom calls. And Candice has got Venus in Scorpio conjunct her Sun, conjunct her Pluto. That's a big a big energy in her 4th house, which is a big house to have that. And again, I'm going to let us unpack that when we have a Zoom call more, because obviously Candice can speak into some of her family, because remember, the 4th house is home, roots, your early environment, your ancestral lineage, your early conditioning. Sun is where you're supposed to shine super brightly, but she was born in the nighttime where the sun obviously was not visibly shining, and Venus conjunct the sun. Now they're so close that Venus was invisible at the time of her birth, which comes back to that journey I was saying. Venus is invisible, then she's morning star, invisible, then she's evening star. And one of those invisible points is when she's doing a retrograde. So, and also she has Pluto in Scorpio, and Pluto is the modern ruler of Scorpio. There is a deep excavation here. This is like this very deep unpacking underworld energy in the deepest part of her chart. But also Scorpio doesn't rule the 4th house. Do you see that? Libra rules the 4th house. Scorpio rules the 5th house. So all of this that was going on in her 4th house, her childhood, her upbringing, her roots, her home environment, her situation, her transformation, and she's born with Venus retrograde too. Let me double check that. Sorry, I see there's a little R there. Crumbs. Well, there we go. Yep, she's also got a Venus retrograde. Oh my goodness. So you're a Scorpio Venus star point, probably like me then, Cans. And that's definitely in the taking off the clothing. You were born like being stripped naked. So as was Marty. I think Marty, you're the one of the Venus retrograde. And you've also got Mercury retrograde, Cans, which we will get to next month in a more strong way. But just to say that all this that she grew up experiencing has impacted the house that Scorpio actually rules, which is the house of pleasures, fun, hobbies, children. Has all very much been impacted by this whole scenario. So yeah, remember to write your Venus story and then bring it to our talks, because it will be so interesting where you can kind of like relate that reflectivity to. And also don't forget, look at where is Taurus and what does that mean in my chart, and where is Libra. I mean, in this case, you can see Libra is right behind where her Venus actually is. And then the last chart that I'm opening, bearing in mind there are a few I haven't done because I didn't get permissions from some people. Bronwyn, your Venus is, can you see her? Oh yes, I can see her. Here she is. And actually on first sight, you might think she's in Scorpio, but just look at the degrees. Mars is at 23, Scorpio. Venus is at 1, so the next sign of Sagittarius. So yeah, this is quite a fiery, fun, value, travel, adventure, freedom. You will definitely have a strong sense of valuing freedom. And even though these two are fairly far apart and in different signs, they are so not as intense as Mindy's Mars-Venus conjunction, which is tighter and in the same sign. There is still an aspect to the story that brings the two of them together. But Mars is actually happy because he's in his own sign. So if Venus was in Mars's sign 2 degrees, like 2 days prior, if you'd been born 2 days earlier, she would actually be more weakened because she'd be sitting next to Mars and he would be at home. And so he would have the upper hand, he would have the strength. But because you have that Venus, maybe 3 days, because it's nearly 2 degrees of Sag, but it's irrelevant, a few days earlier birth to where you were born, you actually have this inner feminine that ultimately, when is needed, she will fight for her freedom. She will fight for what is right. Think about all the Sagittarian things. Go check out our little cheat sheet and think about that deep desire for understanding other people, understanding other cultures, understanding other spiritual traditions, not allowing yourself to be boxed into situations and held down, disempowered. And so actually, I quite love for you that you have your Venus having moved. And I'm not saying that everybody who has Venus in Scorpio is going to struggle with all those things, but I do feel like specifically in this chart with Mars right there, it's almost like a little gift that you didn't come a few days earlier, that Venus got a chance to move into the next sign. I think it's really given a lot of momentum and strength to your independence. I'd say it that way. Okay, so I think that is where we are going to stop with this little reflection through the charts. We're going to meet on Friday, I'm hoping. I will send a message on the group in case you haven't gotten to the end of this video by the time we get there. But if you have gotten to the end of this video, try to write down all of your important details that you want to touch in on, everything that you've reflected on for yourself, either that I've said, or I mean, I noticed I was loving what you guys were coming back with, feedback